Do INFJs have a big ego or not? This is a complicated question, and yet I want to answer in a rather straightforward fashion. I would say that if you take the meaning of big ego literally, INFJs don't tend to have a big ego, but not necessarily for the reasons you might think. This is not to say, for example, that all INFJs are modest. Certainly there are INFJs who have NI worldviews and NI visions that are kind of expressions of that basic worldview, that basic holistic worldview, that are very ambitious, very world transforming. They might never materialize in reality, but at the same time, it would be wrong to say that those visions are modest. Like sometimes they do aim to be world-changing, world-shaping, right? Or world-making, to paraphrase the philosopher Nelson Goodman. So from that perspective, it would be wrong to say that the INFJ visionary experience is particularly localized or modest in nature. But that is not to say that INFJs have a big ego. Well, first of all, let's keep in mind that often, perhaps most of the time, having what's called a big ego is an overcompensation for a very fragile ego, right? So you're actually not really describing what the person is really like, but what the person is performing as, what the person is trying to project. Now, that doesn't seem to be a strategy that the INFJ relies upon that much. The INFJ relies on two strategies in dealing with the world, predominantly the strategy of adaptive submission, which I've discussed before, and the strategy of which is an incompatible strategy with adaptive submission, which is the strategy of self-containment, or in slightly more technical language that I like to use and I would like to be introduced and inducted definitively in the INFJ vocabulary, because I think it's very important, which is the attitude of solipsism. So again, being withdrawn, self-contained, having the freedom to engage your NI world to your heart's content, but in a sense at the detriment and sometimes at the sacrifice of productive social engagement with the world. Now, the problem with the INFJ is, in fact, that, and I've made videos, I've discussed this topic before in relation to type 6, Enneagram type 6 INFJs, because I think Enneagram 6 INFJs are very common, one of the most common Enneatypes for INFJ, and that's something that's not recognized enough. And there's something that the type 6 and that the INFJ overlap about, and that's the feeling of incompleteness. It might be strange to put it that way, but the INFJ is often defined by a somewhat incomplete ego. And by this I mean that, if you like, the INFJ is straddling two words, so their ego is straddling two words. There's the temptation via FE, predominantly via FE, to let the ego be defined by interactions with others, maybe over-defined by interaction with others, and that's when you're moving towards adaptive submission. There's the opposite strategy, which is to let your ego be defined by your NI world, and here the risk is merging with your NI world, right? Now, in disorder versions of this, in mental illness versions of this, this would be more akin to a psychosis. The other one, the first, the counterpart, adaptive submissive mode, in the disordered version would be more akin to neurosis. Now, I think you can get a sense of why the INFJ is often struggling with ego incompleteness. Either the INFJ finds the resources to build what they think is an ego through getting lost in the social worlds of others' expectations, or they opt for a strategy which is not compatible with it at first sight, which is the NI world, the NI world of withdrawal from the social world, and where, in a sense, you let your ego be defined by the archetypes. So you let your ego be defined by the unconscious, and ultimately expose yourself to the risk of being invaded by the unconscious. And again, that's something that Carl Jung defines as a core aspect of psychosis. So there are risks here, of course, that the ego is aware of this. In fact, contrary to what we think, not all of the ego is conscious to experience. That's why the ego has defenses against these risks. And the INFJ deploys these defenses mostly unconsciously, like other people do, through the resources of their particular personality organizations and particular personality types. Now, what is the solution? Well, the solution is, of course, to complete your ego. And it might be believed that this is incredibly difficult to achieve, but because the structure of personality, the organization of personality is defined early in life. This is true to an extent. However, I don't necessarily think that INFJs are as incomplete as they think personality-wise in terms of how they came into the world and how they grew up. A lot of the struggles of the INFJ is really with the world as such, the experience of being in the world from childhood, but that can be from childhood, say from the age of 6, 7, 8, where the basics of personality organizations are actually there, but there's a distortion that accrues via the fact that, you know, from the first conscious and remembered experiences of socialization, the INFJ feels that the modern world has a hostility to it, that they're misunderstood, that they cannot really find balance. And I think that leads to that feeling of incompleteness. Now, that can be a massive weight, it can be a burden that is never resolved. And that's the whole challenge of INFJ and individuation. The path of individuation, which is a Jungian articulation, has, I think, I'm more and more convinced of it now, as its ultimate goal, not liberation and spiritualization, because that's the third mode of being. I mean, in a sense, you could define it as a goal, but the means to that goal, which is a goal unto itself, is what I've been calling in recent videos attunement. The ability to develop in your existence a harmony between your NI world and the social world of external reality. If you can attain this attunement, that's the key. The transcendence of severance, this is another expression that I often use these days, is key to the completion of your ego, to the attainment of an ego that is complete in the sense of whole, in the sense of healthy. Does not mean it will be a big ego. It doesn't mean that it will be an overblown ego. It certainly doesn't mean that it will be fragile. It will be a much more contented and pacified ego at many levels, and that's difficult for INFJs. I think the key resides in this notion of existential attunement. Okay, so let me know in the comments what you think, guys. Drop me a like if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget that if you want to hear more, particularly about this struggle that the INFJ has in the modern world, the world is often felt as hostile, but this is my new book on the INFJ, The Infinite Soul. In fact, there's a connection between the theme of infinity and the theme of the completeness of the ego. So if you want to hear more about this, get the book at the link below. INFJ Life in the Modern World, finding meaning, purpose, and value in this world that is often hostile to us. Now, there's a prequel to that book, which is The Ecstatic Soul, looks more at the contents of INFJ consciousness. The two books go together. You can see the covers are similar. That's kind of a classic. Check the reviews, there's lots of them. It's an in-depth research into the INFJ mind and its existential manifestations. And as usual, don't forget that my channel very much, and the continuation of my activity on my channel, depends on your generous support, your donations, mostly via Patreon. There's a link below. Please consider donating to my channel for a small amount every month. You can interact with me there. You can suggest new content. You get access to bonus videos. So, you know, there's good aspects, but mainly this is to help me to support my work. Consider it, and I'll talk to you next time, guys. Bye-bye.